missing. I feel like my glasses are missing. That's better. By the way, you like my festive setup, by the way? So, now, let's get into the good stuff, shall we? So, I just finished Punisher. The Netflix Marvel series, Punisher. Holy crap. Like, this show has, like, some balls to show, to be honest. Like, it has immense graphic. People get mutilated. And I don't recommend for younger audiences, like, say, your cousin that's like 8 years old or 10 to watch this. Because this show is just utterly intense and gruesome and violent, and I love it. And I just recently found out the soundtrack, for whoever did the soundtrack, the composer was Tyler Bates, and I give you props because this entire soundtrack sounds amazing. The theme, everything. Oh, that's not it. Here it is. Okay. Like, just listen to this. It better not be an ad. Give me a second. Like, listen to this. Like, from first hearing, I would assume that this show would be like dark, intense, because I've heard songs like that in my playlist that like give you that kind of like, you know, that feeling, that badass feeling, but at the same time it gives you that dark feel towards some things. And this show definitely gives like full blown Frank Castle. And there is a lot to talk about, considering that this show takes a while to finish. I mean, it took me about. Well, I'm a slow watcher. I like to rewatch a few episodes, kind of grasp the little Easter eggs, and I also, you know. So let me get into it. I'm not gonna try and describe each and every single episode because that's gonna take forever. So here I am. I'm just gonna give you my full review, like my opinion on it, and I would give this show actually a 9 out of 10. Definitely. No, actually, scratch that, 10 out of 10. Because for me, I'm a huge fan of Marvel comics. I love Daredevil. I love that show. I love Jessica Jones, Luke Cage. Iron Fist was a slow start, but I kind of like his backstory in a way, from Kunlun and everything, the fighting style. But I mean, that show took a really slow start, and to me, to finally see kind of a full circle in a way, because we got introduced to Frank Castle in season 2's The Punisher. Oh wait, let me rephrase that. We got introduced to Frank Castle in season 2 of Daredevil as he's not the Punisher yet, but he comes directly in the middle of Daredevil season 2, and towards the end of the season we see a character arc of both Matt Murdock and Frank Castle, and this was really like kind of tearaway towards his own series. And in many words, the show can be described as chaotic, loose cannon, more or less insane. And this show takes a lot of references towards the comics, and I really do adore that, because for me, I watched the Tom Jane with John Travolta. That one, I like that one, though there is some things I have issues with, like the motivation with the villain. Oh, and you know, the villain in this show is amazing. I wasn't expecting it, and to me, I really do, you know, like a good villain sometimes, especially in the shows like Luke Cage or Daredevil, Wilson Fisk, The Hand, Elektra, stuff like that. And then in Luke Cage, you have Diamondback, you have a bunch of Black Mariah and stuff like that. Not you know. So this show, yeah, this show it takes place after the events of the Defenders, because if you look closely, um, in one newspaper article that I think Karen holds, it says a battle underground or underneath New York City, something like that, and that directly ties after the events of Defenders, because in the Defenders season one, there's this huge earthquake that happens, and then Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, Danny Rand, Matt Murdock, all in glorious costume fashion, go down there and fight the Hand. And apparently, Matt sacrifices himself after a huge explosion that topples the building that was underneath the cave they were fighting, and the Dane. So, and also this kind of has that reminiscent feeling from the season 2 of Daredevil, because in the first episode we see the events that take place, like we see for him, for example, wearing his original vest that he painted from season 2 of the last episode of Daredevil, with the trench coat and everything. He's hunting down all these gangs, these motorcycle gangs, and cutting down the Irish and the Dogs of Hell. And in the show, it explores a very dark turn to the character, because in the show it explores not only Frank Castle and his loss of his children and his wife, but it explores other people. For example, there's this I think his name was Lewis. His name was Lewis. I don't remember his last name, but he is a young man who suffers from PTSD, and then that's what this show is really good at. It explores the downsides of PTSD. Now, I'm not saying that what you have is a very unlucky thing. Don't worry, there's treatments for that. But in this case, they show what happens if stuff like this happens to a younger person and they don't know how to handle it. And his character takes a very, very dark turn. And for Frank Castle's part, though, he has a different way of coping with his loss. He basically cuts down most of the people who were involved with killing his family. Basically, he killed a sergeant of Homeland Security. He kills. Oh, spoilers, by the way. Sorry, you would expect that from a Netflix series. There's a lot of spoilers. He kills basically everyone that was involved in the murder of his family. And that's what it kind of explores. It explores, and I was reading a review before I watched the show. They didn't say any spoilers, but it says that the show explores a more mental state of Frank Castle, because we wanted to show the difference between a madman and a murderer and a man with a dark history. And this kind of goes along with the comics, because in some of the comics, Frank Castle is initially a very gruesome Batman. Sorry to compare him to everyone's favorite detective, but that's how, the only way I can describe it. For example, Daredevil is initially like Superman. He wants to go towards the law. Even Matt Murdock is a lawyer, but sometimes he has to go to the law enforcement or take matters into his own hands, at the same time still trusting that system. While Frank Castle, like Batman, goes above the law. He is initially a one-man army. Actually, that's what they call him in the Daredevil season 2. And he just basically takes matters into his own hands in a very specific way. And knowing that this show takes place in a very recent events of history, they mention a lot about the show takes place in New York, and they mention a lot about terrorist attacks. And in one episode, there was a bombing that happens, 3 occasion bombs that happen, and Frank mentions that New York will fight back, and that actually is very true in a way. And he might be mentioning the Defenders, Matt Murdock. He only knows about Matt Murdock, but he might be mentioning that. But in some people's cases, they believe that he's saying that in whether or not you bomb the New York City, he still has faith in that the city would grow and fix itself. But for the time being, he takes matters into his own hands. So, and throughout the show, you believe that Frank is not a madman. He's not a crazy, psychopath out to kill people. He has a very strong moral code. He was in the military. He was part of a specific military. Sorry. He was part of a specific military contract for the CIA known as Cerberus, and it was to be tasked with, kind of exterminating and clearing out, terrorist attacks and alleged terrorist groups. And to see the way they kind of took it, it was a risk, to be honest, because not only did they have to show respect to soldiers in a way, they wanted to, in military movies are very hard to do. For one, they have to show the correct way to do things. Sometimes they're able to pass it off in a way, but at the same time, there are those people that are very nitpicky. And then they have to show sort of the appropriate manner towards what Marines do. And he is a Marine, and throughout this entire show, you see the camaraderie, the trust that allows with them. They even have their own group. I don't know what they call themselves, but they trust each other, especially with him and his friend called Billy Russo. And I'll get into him later because there is a very specific way or turn for him. So yeah, and then one episode it shows how he was treated and how he was trained, and it shows very dark turns. It explores the dark sides of the CIA. It explores the dark regions of like covert military operations. Excuse me. And all in all, it was pretty believable at the same time. It was really immersive in a way because we see Frank kind of deep down inside, he loves what he does. He even says it. I love what I do. I love being out in the field. I love, almost getting shot at. And then he almost, gives. He said something similar to that. And to see him actually kind of do it and the dedication he has towards his team rather than the mission is very emotional in a way, because at one point, Schoonhover, one of the major characters, who in season 2 of Daredevil turns out to be the bad guy, he gets his arm amputated, or I think it was cut off. I think it was either that or amputated. But Frank is mad. He gets angry because the Agent Orange, or I think Agent Orange, or dang it. William Rollins. There you go. William Rollins. He basically says, "Did you find him? He was being a little arrogant and all." And Frank basically makes him blind in one eye. That proves how dedicated he was to his friend and his team. And throughout the show, he it explores, I won't leave you, brother. You'll always be my brother. And it also explores elements of betrayal and various elements of sadness, because the show really wants to dive into the not as the physical aspect of Frank Castle, but the mind, because the comics basically, he's a broken man. He may seem tough, like buff and everything, but deep down inside he still cares for his family. And throughout the show, it's just really it's really intense. It has dark pasts that are morally gray, and they really are just intense. And it was, for me, watching the all 13 episodes, I felt real satisfied because for one, it has good soundtrack, great casting. John Berthel as the Punisher was really good. I even, I like his voice, his grisly Batman-esque voice. And then you have his friend Billy Russo, who I was gonna say get to later, but now I'm gonna get to him now. Towards the end of the show, or towards actually the middle of the show, we discovered that he's actually coinciding with William Rollins, the person who Frank Castle is trying to take down. And we figured this out, and because he has his own company known as Anvil, and that's the sense of betrayal I was talking about. He betrays Frank Castle because they've been friends in the field for 8 years, and for Frank it was heartbreaking in a way, but at the same time he's like, I'm gonna get my revenge on you still. And at the end, the last episode, I think it's called Memento Mori. Yeah, Memento Mori. We see Billy Russo become Jigsaw initially because they had a really brutal fight. It was very grisly and stuff. And we see all his face becoming, snitched up. And we see him in a really weird looking cone. And we are led to believe that it's Jigsaw. And basically Punisher created Jigsaw. And, this show takes a really, really strong turn for Netflix and Marvel, considering that the success with Deadpool, since the success with Logan, which is, not part of Marvel, but it's still in the same region. But, with the success of all these, rated R films in Marvel's little checkbook, I'm kind of glad they kind of went to this kind of direction, because for Daredevil, in season 1, it was a low-key kind of violent. It was like, oh, his face is bloody, But then season 2 came out, it was like, whoa. That was, Then Luke Cage came out, it was the more lighthearted Harlem King. Or not Harlem King, Harlem Guardian. And it was low-key at the same time, very gritty. It had its moments. And then there was Jessica Jones, which took the more, kind of the more deeper detective side, where it involves not grisly murders but more mental state. That was a really good show too. Then there's Iron Fist, who was like, but all these shows that are kind of lighthearted. Not Jessica Jones actually. Jessica Jones was really out of the ordinary. But if I were to compare the shows, I would put Punisher, Jessica Jones, and Daredevil as some of the most violent shows for Marvel on Netflix, and then Luke Cage, blah blah. But yeah, I give this show a 10 out of 10. Most. I was planning to give it a 9, but, for those Marvel fans out there, I'm pretty sure you would enjoy this. And for those who want to want to do a Netflix binge, this is your show. It's action-packed, music is great, acting is solid. You'll enjoy it if you're just looking for a show to binge this weekend. Oh, by the way, I hope all of you had a good weekend. Yeah, and sorry, that was random. Yeah, and this is sort of the end of the review for me on Punisher, because I just finished it. I'm kind of tired because I just sat through it all, and I don't know what else to say besides watch it. Yeah, so yeah, that is my review on Marvel's Netflix series The Punisher. Go out and see it, and I hope you enjoy. Bye-bye.